So hello and welcome to Understanding and Communicating with Angry Children. This webinar is brought to you by Prevent Child Abuse New Jersey, and it's for all of our fabulous caregivers in all of our parent linking program sites throughout the state of New Jersey. So before we begin, I kind of want to go over a couple of housekeeping notes. It'll be really important for you to have a blank piece of paper and a pen. I sent you all a picture of a brain when I mailed out the webinar. The webinar worksheet entitled Understanding and Communicating with Angry Children worksheet, and the workshop evaluation form that I also emailed out when I sent out the webinar. The worksheet will help you gain a better understanding of the content of the webinar. It'll ask a couple of questions, and it also serves as proof that you participated in the webinar. So once you receive a copy of the worksheet, we will email you your certificate of completion to your PLP site so that you can have it for your professional development records. Please just make sure that your name is clearly printed on the worksheet. That way I can fill it out properly on the certificate. The evaluation form kind of just gives us a better understanding of what you liked and what you disliked about the webinar. You definitely don't need to put your name on the evaluation form. Hopefully you like it all, but we really want to hear your opinion and feedback. So please return both pieces of paper to your program coordinator or case manager, and they'll forward it to us here at Prevent Child Abuse. Okay, so screw this. Why is this going? That was bad. Hello and welcome to Understanding and Communicating with Angry Children webinar. This webinar is brought to you through Prevent Child Abuse New Jersey. This webinar is for all of our fabulous caregivers and all of our fabulous daycare centers and all of our fabulous parent linking program sites throughout the state of New Jersey. My name is Jill Kaufman. I will be your conductor for the day or your trainer for the day. So before we begin, it's important that we kind of go through some housekeeping rules just to get us through the rest of the webinar. You will definitely need a blank piece of paper and a pen. You will need the picture of the brain that I sent to you. You'll also need the webinar worksheet. It's entitled Understanding and Communicating with Angry Children worksheet, and a workshop evaluation form, which was also sent to you. The worksheet just is there to help you gain a better understanding of the content of the webinar. It also has a couple of questions for you to answer, and it also just serves as proof that you participated in this webinar in general. So once we receive a copy of that worksheet, we'll be able to review it and then send you out your professional development certificate that just also shows that you participated in this webinar. Please just make sure that your name is clearly printed on the worksheet. That way I can get it right on the certificate. And then the evaluation form will basically just give us a better understanding of what you liked and what you disliked about the webinar. Hopefully you like it all, but you definitely don't need to put your name on the evaluation form. And we really appreciate all opinions, all feedback, and all of that good stuff. So once you're done with all of that, please just hand it back to your PLP program coordinator or case manager, and they'll make sure that we get it here at PCA. Okay, so who am I, right? Who's this person talking to me through the computer? So I'm Jill Kaufman. I am the program specialist for the parent linking program with Prevent Child Abuse New Jersey. So who's Prevent Child Abuse New Jersey? I'm sure you've all heard the name before. We just partner with the New Jersey Department of Children and Families Office of School Link Services to provide some technical assistance and training to the 10 PLP sites across New Jersey. Prior to becoming the program specialist for the PLP program, I worked in Prevent Child Abuse's human trafficking prevention program, and I also spent 2.5 years as the assistant house manager for the Ronald McDonald House of New Brunswick. I'm a licensed social worker, and I have a certificate of specialty in violence against women and children. I'm super, super excited to spend the next hour or so with you and talking about this issue and this topic, and I promise I will do my absolute best to keep the webinar exciting and interactive. Okay, so let's get started. So it really wasn't too long ago where babies were kind of just considered blobs who didn't feel much until around the age of 2, right? But children, like all human beings, have feelings. And I'm sure we see that in our day-to-day operations in our centers. Babies and toddlers are extremely deep feeling beings. They have the ability to feel angry, frustrated, confused, just like we do. And we're full-grown adults. They learn to develop as they grow. They will learn whatever we pretty much teach them, right? They're kind of like sponges. And they kind of learn through our actions and how we handle situations and experiences that they see us. So if we respond in a hissy fit because we dropped our coffee on the floor, you know, let's say they dropped their ball on the floor, they may respond the same way because that's how they've seen us do it. So today I'm going to try and discuss with you how and why children get angry and how we can help resolve conflicts and control that anger or that frustration. We're going to go over some great strategies. We have some great tips. I'm looking forward to it. So our first workshop objective of the day is learn about social emotional development in infants and toddlers and its impact on temperament and self-regulation. Those are some big words. I don't even really know what they mean, but we'll get to them, I promise. Next, we're going to understand the 3 different temperaments in children. So there's 3 separate temperaments that we're going to go over, and we're going to go over some strategies to work with all 3. And then we're going to learn some techniques and strategies to use in our daycare centers, which is probably why we're all on this webinar in the first place, to help with angry or frustrated infants and toddlers. And lastly, we're going to see the importance in helping our infants and toddlers learn to self-regulate, which is very, very, very important in social emotional development. Okay, so let's do a little bit of an opening reflection, right? All right, let's close our eyes. Let's think of a person in our lives. Could have been a parent, could have been a teacher, could have been a different type of caregiver, could have been a grandparent. Whoever this person was, let's say they made a positive impact on us as a child. How was their tone? What did they say to you? How did it make you feel? Besides caring for you, this person was building your social and emotional development. How did they do that? So let's close our eyes. Let's think about it. Let's reflect on this person. Remember their tone, their attitude. If you got frustrated, how did they respond? If you were sad and crying, how did they respond? Let's think about that. Let's keep that in mind all throughout this webinar. So if this person was responding positively to you, they were helping to build your social and emotional development. What is that? Let's get into it on the next slide. Okay, so social emotional development. What is it, right? It is the capacity in which a child develops from birth to year 5. So since they're born to 5 years, we are developing our social emotional development. So it is also the child's ability to form close and secure adult and peer relationships, experience and regulate and express emotions in socially and culturally appropriate ways, explore their environment, and learn. So we're always learning as a child through our family, through our community, through our culture. If, you know, our moms grew up cooking Sunday night dinner, maybe that's how we learn. Maybe we grow up and cook Sunday night dinner every night for our families. We're always learning when we're a child. We're always picking up on those cues. So the social emotional development is the capacity in which a child develops in their ability to learn, their ability to express and regulate their emotions, and their ability to form close and secure adult and peer relationships. Okay, so now let's pause our webinar. So everybody hit the pause button after I've done with the instructions, and let's do an activity. So take out your blank piece of paper and your pen and list the alphabet A through Z down the middle of the page. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and so on. So let's think about your own social emotional skills and strengths. Think back to that caregiver that took really good care of you, right? And let's try and relate a letter of the alphabet to a social emotional development skill. Okay? So, or it can be a skill that you would like to develop in your own children in your centers, in your daycare centers. So let's pause the webinar, and for 2 minutes, just brainstorm a list of words you're thinking about using the alphabet you just wrote down on your paper. Okay, so for an example, R could mean reaches for objects on their own. This child has the ability to reach for an object on his or her own. So when you're completed, unpause the webinar and we'll keep going. All right, wasn't that a fun activity? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about my own personal social emotional alphabet. I'm not going to go in any alphabetical order. I'm just going to list some of the most important ones that I had written down. So for C, I wrote can be comforted by an adult, a familiar adult. I think it's really important in a social emotional development phase of this child that they can be comforted by a familiar adult. So whether that's a caregiver, a parent, a grandparent, a teacher, so on and so forth. For L, I have laughs out loud. Can this child laugh out loud? Does this child laugh out loud on his or her own? Do they initiate this laugh themselves? For R, I have respond positively to touch. Do they respond positively to a familiar caregiver's touch, or do they completely break down in tears, or do they hide, or do they run when someone goes to reach for them? I think that's a really, really important part. So for S, I put smile spontaneously. Do they smile spontaneously if something appeases them during a social interaction? Let's say mom, comes to pick them up from the center at the end of the day. When she picks him or her up or their child up, does that baby smile? Is that baby smiling because mom is smiling? What's their reaction? Okay, great. So moving on. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about brain development and social emotional development. Let's take a second to look at some of these statements about brain and social emotional development and take a guess as to whether they're true or false, okay? So this is not a quiz. I obviously can't see, hear, or read what your guess is, so don't get upset if you get it wrong. Okay, so A baby is born with just a few brain cells. Do we think that's true or do we think that's false? Let's check it out. It's actually false. A baby is born with more than 100 billion brain cells. Some of these cells are already connecting to other cells at birth. These connections regulate the heartbeat and breathing. They control reflexes and regulate other functions needed to survive. Wow, that's cool. It's interesting. Next one. The kind of care a young child receives plays a big role in how the brain wires itself. Do we think that's true or do we think that's false? It's true. From the moment a baby is born, every experience helps build the connections that guide development. No two baby brains are alike, so obviously no two children in your centers are alike. Early experiences impact the actual architecture of the brain. So that's going back to social emotional development. Early interactions affect the development of the brain. Early environments that this child is put in. So, are they in a healthy environment at home, or are they in an environment where mom and dad are always screaming at each other, or where there's violence or things like that? What kind of environment are they in that will develop, that will cause the development of their brain to change? So let's look at number 3. Brain development is completely determined by genetics. Well, do we think that's true or do we think that's false? That's false. Baby's day-to-day experiences help decide how his or her brain cells will connect to one another. So we kind of just talked about that. So next one. The infant's early brain development is designed to connect the newborn with other human beings around him or her who will provide care. Do we think that's true or do we think that's false? It's true. Babies prefer human stimuli like the face, voice, touch, smell over anything else in their environment. They would rather listen to talking or to you singing than any other kind of sound. All right, moving on. A toddler's brain is less active than an adult's brain. Do we think that's true, or do we think that's false? That is definitely false. A toddler's brain is twice as active as an adult's brain, which is actually really cool if you think about it. Next one. Young children need expensive toys to get smarter. Do we think that's true, or do we think that's false? It is false. Young children need loving, responsive, and predictable care and experiences such as gentle touch, talking, reading, singing, and rocking. So we don't need to go to Toys R Us and buy out the really expensive section. I think that store is really expensive anyway, for our babies to get smarter. What they need is connections. They need talking and reading and singing and rocking and responsive caregivers that will help their brains develop as well as develop socially and emotionally. All right, so next one. Babies can match emotional voice's tone to emotional facial expression. So can they match their mom's voice, how she's talking, to her facial expression? So if mom is really sad and she's kind of talking nice and quietly and sadly, and maybe she's not saying much, and her face is really, there's no facial expression whatsoever, do babies know that she's sad? Do we think that's true, or do we think that's false? It's true. Studies have shown babies as young as 3.5 months are able to connect to their mother's tone of speech and facial expressions. So if these babies are in your centers and you're watching them for the majority of the day, that means that they're doing this with you too. They're matching your tone to your facial expression. And they're learning through you what each tone represents. So next one, babies seek physical and emotional equilibrium or balance. This is definitely true. Infants are unable to regulate themselves. Although they are born to feel deep connections, babies are unable to keep themselves in a state of equilibrium or balance. They often need assistance and monitoring of responsive caregivers, which is all of you, to maintain that equilibrium and not become overwhelmed. Great. Okay, so next one. Babies prefer looking at faces. Do we think that's true, or do we think that's false from everything that we just kind of went over? That is definitely true. Infants prefer looking at faces. When given a choice between fearful and smiling faces, newborns look longer at happy faces. So when you're smiling, they just want to stare at you, basically. So basically, not only is the social emotional development important within our infants and toddlers, but so is their brain development. The way we help our infants and toddlers develop their emotional social development on a day-to-day basis also helps their brain. Their brains are wired to connect with you guys. You guys are their day-to-day caregivers. So this is really, really, really important. Okay, so think about it for a second. What types of situations make the infants and toddlers in your centers angry? What types of situations make you angry or cranky? I like to call it hangry, is when I usually get at my worst because I'm usually hungry for an extended period of time, so I get hangry. But I can definitely vocalize that. I can turn to my friend and say, I'm so hungry, let's go eat, please, now. But an infant necessarily can't, and a toddler is still developing their vocabulary, so they can't really vocalize their needs and wants just yet. So think about that. Think about an infant or a toddler trying to vocalize they're hungry, they're tired, they're thirsty, or they're bored. How do they do that? They have tantrums, right? They cry, things like that. So when young children become angry, it's usually because their needs are not being met. They could be, like I said, hungry, thirsty, tired, or bored. They may want something they can't have, or they may be trying to do something a little bit inappropriate for their age, or they're trying to reach something on a counter, or stand up using an item or a table ledge. We've all seen our infants and toddlers do that in our centers. They try to put pressure on a toy and stand up, and then they usually end up falling. And then sometimes they cry, and sometimes they get right back up. They may feel something is not fair. Let's say you took away their pacifier, and they want their pacifier back. They may feel ignored, rejected, punished, misunderstood, or criticized. How many, honestly, how many infants and toddlers can approach you guys in the centers and state, after you said that, I felt really criticized and very judged? Probably about 0%, right? Because they're babies, they're children. They can't do those things. So in some, age definitely makes a difference in how children show their anger, even how adults show their anger. And I just thought this was cute because, all species have a way of showing how they feel. So baby elephants throw themselves into the mud when they're upset, and elephants are one of my favorite animals. So I just thought that was cute and kind of break up the content a little bit. Okay, so like adults, not all children respond in the same manner, right? So on this slide, we're going to kind of break down how they respond through their different ages. So children have different temperaments, right, which influences how they respond to anger. But first, let's cover what anger might look like in a baby's perspective. So 0 to 18 months. They may be discomforted caused by loud noise, hunger, or tiredness, and they may cry, which they probably will cry. Toddlers, they think they're the center of the world and want their needs met immediately. It's obviously very difficult for them to share these things, so they have strong notions of what belongs to them. They still do not know many words, they can't speak that well, and can be upset or angry because people do not understand them. So toddlers also have difficulty controlling their feelings. They may use tantrums to express their feelings. I know tantrums are everybody's favorite. And they can even hurt others to get something they want. Like, let's say they're playing in the center and somebody steals their toy truck. They may push the other toddler that stole their truck so that they can have their truck back. But we know as caregivers and as adults, that's not an appropriate response. So as their caregivers, we need to show them what is an appropriate response to ask for their truck back. Okay, so a child's temperament is influenced to some extent by their interactions with the environment, right? We kind of talked about this in social emotional development. Our social emotional development really develops through our interactions with our caregivers and our interactions with our family and our culture and our environment. So a temperament describes the way in which the infant or toddler, so he or she, approaches and reacts to the world. It is their personal style, flair, or vibe. Okay? This style addresses an infant's level of activity, adaptability to daily routines, mood, intensity of reactions, sensitivity to what's going on around him or her. So let's say a child is being cared for in an environment that places really high value on scheduling, predictable eating, sleeping, and toileting patterns. A child whose temperament is somewhat irregular, who's just not used to that, might be able over time to begin to sleep, eat, and use the toilet more regularly if they're in this type of environment. However, an adult or caregiver cannot force a child's temperament to change. However, though, the interaction with the child has with the environment can produce movements towards different traits of different types of temperaments. So we're born with the temperament that we have, but it really doesn't change, but we can pick up other temperaments as we grow and as we develop. So let's say we're born very, very fussy and we're always fidgeting and, we don't sleep at night, but let's say we're put into a more stable sleeping routine, we might be able to become a little bit more calm at bedtime, and we might be able to sleep through the night, 4 or 5 times a week instead of not sleeping through the night at all. So it all depends on their caregiver and their environment and what's happening around them. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the different types of temperaments. So we have easy or flexible, right? Our easy and flexible babies are happy children with regular sleeping and eating habits. They're adaptable, so they're able to change from situation to situation or environment to environment. They're pretty calm. they're not easily upset, right? Okay, so our next type of child's temperament is active or feisty. Feisty, I'm sorry, I can't say that word. They might be fussy, irregular in feeding and sleeping, fearful of new people and situations, and easily upset by noise and stimulation, and very intense in their reactions. So let's say somebody drops something really, really heavy on the floor, and it makes a huge slam. That child might tense up and shut down and drop what they were doing and be very, 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 very quiet and intense in themselves. Okay, so our next type of child is slow to warm or cautious. This type of child is a little bit less active. They tend to be fussy. They may withdraw or react negatively to new situations. And over time, they become more positive with repeated exposure to a new person, object, or situation. Okay, it's really important to understand that not all children fall neatly into one of these three categories. All temperamental traits range in intensity. So let's say we have a child that's in the easy and flexible category. This child could be very, 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 very happy on a scale of 1 to 10. This child is a 10. But they could also be very calm, but on a scale of 1 to 10, it's more like a 2. This child is only calm some of the time or basically none of the time. So it's really important to understand that they all range in intensity. All of these traits range. A child's basic temperament does not change over time. So like I said before, we're born with the temperament that we have, but the intensity of these traits can be affected by a family's cultural values and parenting styles. So like I said before, everything has to do with the child's environment. Every time you recognize a child's effort on a specific task, you are definitely strengthening that trait. So for example, like if an active or feisty toddler does not sleep at nap time, but on the days that they do sleep at nap time and they sleep the whole way through and they sleep all cuddled up and calm, you might want to acknowledge the fact once they wake up, you did a great job at nap time. That will help strengthen that trait and kind of lead them towards the more regular sleeping patterns that we really want to develop. Okay, so for example, consider the reactions of two infants when a stranger comes into a room. A very, very slow to warm or cautious infant might look for his or her caregiver and relax when they make eye contact with that caregiver, right? While another baby with an easy temperament may smile and get all bubbly and show little reaction to, honestly, to the caregiver. They may smile at them and then look away, right? Or the active or feisty child might be very fearful and run and hide in the corner or run and hide behind your leg. You never know. It's really, though, really, really important to understand that no temperament is better than the other. Easy flexible is not better than active or feisty, and slow to warm is not better than easy or flexible or any of the above. Let's reflect a little bit on our own temperament and our own preferences. Knowing more about your own temperament traits, so like, do you have regular sleeping patterns? Do you have regular eating habits? I definitely don't have regular eating habits. You know, I just don't. It's just not something I've ever established in my life. So I understand that that's part of my temperament. That's just part of who I am. But that doesn't mean that a baby that has regular eating habits is better. It doesn't mean that at all. So if you have a caregiver that really in your centers, or you are a caregiver in your center that really enjoys movement and loud music and always playing and constant hustle and bustle, a very slow to warm or cautious child might have a difficult time settling in this environment, but that doesn't mean that they can't gravitate towards it in some respect. So just try and be reflective of that. So if you do have a slow to warm or cautious child, maybe we're not always playing music in the center. Maybe we're not always running around the center and playing all these fun and interactive games. Maybe we're sitting in a circle and having story time, or we're having some other sort of calming activity. So if you reflect on yourself and your own traits, this can help you become more attuned to the experience of each child within your care. You can then determine what adjustments might be needed to create a better fit for each child. So better fit, right? Let's talk a little bit about better fit. How can we use our knowledge of each child's temperament to individualize our curriculums in our classrooms? Okay? You can use your knowledge of temperament in many ways to support positive social, emotional development in the infants and toddlers that you care for. Certain practices in your centers might be especially important for certain temperament types. So let's talk about this. What exactly am I talking about? I'm talking about goodness of fit. As a caregiver, wanting to support healthy social emotional development, you should be awareness of the goodness of fit, right? So for example, like we talked about this before, a child who is very active, intense, and unpredictable may mismatch with a caregiver whose style is very rigid, mellow, and lacks variety. But that doesn't mean that you can't work with this child. That's really important to note. So with the 3 temperaments and our current knowledge of them, let's talk a little bit about what we can do in our centers, right? Okay. So for the easy and flexible child, we can check in with them. And you may want to jot down some notes on your blank piece of paper. It's up to you guys. Back to the easy and flexible child, you may want to check in with her or him, right? You might want to initiate communication about emotions or what they may be feeling. You want to use language to develop awareness and understanding of emotions, feelings, and reactions, right? So you want to say, do you feel sad today? Or are you tired? Or are you hungry? You have to use your language. Make sure that they know their feelings and preferences are recognized and validated. Encourage them to seek help when he or she may need it, and work with them to communicate their feelings and their needs of others. Great, great, great. Okay, so for the active or feisty child, you definitely have to be flexible for this type of child. Provide areas and opportunities for them to make choices and engage them in gross motor and active play to expend that high level of energy, right? So this type of child may need 15 more minutes of being outside on the playground than the more easy or flexible or slow to warm child. Feisty children might need a peaceful environment in order to help them calm themselves and transition from playtime to nap time. So maybe it's a good idea to put that child with the feisty temperament to that slow to warm child because they're very calm in their appearance right before nap time. They may want to play Play-Doh together or play building blocks together, whatever it is that they want to play together. But maybe that feisty child will take on how that cautious or slow to warm child is feeling at that time. Okay, so with the feisty child, you really definitely want to stay calm when faced with the child's intense emotions, because if you get all flustered, it probably is just going to fluster this child even more and keep their reactions going even longer. Okay, and you definitely want to label their emotions by describing what they seem to be feeling. So you look just like the flexible child, you may want to say, yes, you look very sad today. Or, I know he stole your truck. I'm so sorry that you're upset. Things like that. All right, so for the slow to warm child, you probably want to set up a very predictable environment for this child and stick to a very clear routine. You may want to use pictures and language to remind the cautious child of what will happen next. So let's say we're transitioning from lunch to story time. You may want to flash a picture of a book for this child to show them what's going to happen next. You really have to give these children ample time to establish relationships with new children or to get comfortable in new situations. So don't be disheartened if a slow to warm or cautious child comes into your centers on their first day and is very cautious and doesn't warm up to you and doesn't smile and doesn't immediately hug you. That's just their temperament. That doesn't mean that they're a bad child or not a good fit for your center. Okay, and so we definitely want to provide support and encouragement in unfamiliar situations for their increasing independence. So let's say we're moving this child to a new side of the center. So they no longer fit on the infant side, we're moving them over to the toddler side. We definitely want to be there with them to provide that support and that encouragement that they can do it. They can fit in on this side of the center so that that child can develop their own independence, and you don't need to be with them every single day that they're on this new side of the center. I know that was a lot, but hopefully it makes sense. So let's keep going. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about self-regulation. And self-regulation is a child's ability to gain control of their bodily functions, manage emotions, and maintain focus and control. So, you know, definitely, a child's temperament takes a huge part in self-regulation. So a feisty child may not be able to gain control or manage their emotions as easily as a flexible child. Or a cautious child may not be able to maintain focus and control in a new environment because, you know what, they're in a new environment, they're slow to warm and they're cautious and they're scared, and, you know, maybe you're not there to provide that support for them. So self-regulation really helps them gain control, and self-regulation is something that they develop over time. Okay, so what is it? It's the cornerstone of early childhood development. It's been around for years and years and years. It's probably older than me, right? And it's visible in all areas of behaviors. So it's in everything a child does throughout his or her day. So infants and toddlers who are overwhelmed, so maybe they're not self-regulating so well that day, really depend on the outside help as a responsive caregiver you're supposed to provide, which I'm sure you guys do. So through these caring relationships, babies begin to develop their ability to self-regulate. So if you're there to provide support while the child is calming themselves down after a tantrum, they may be able to gain control faster, and you are teaching them how to regulate their temper tantrums. You're teaching them how to regulate their ability to control their emotions. Okay, so just as another example, feeding is one example of a daily routine that you guys structure for your infants and toddlers, right, in your centers. The feeding process definitely requires several aspects of self-regulation. It requires a baby to suck, swallow, and breathe, right? So if a cry signals an infant's hunger, so that's a way it's showing it needs something, right? The responsive caregiver should come in and provide that meal for that child. You are now teaching them that when they're feeling hungry, you will respond with food. So once they get to that point where they're older and they're able to care for themselves, they'll be like, oh, I'm hungry, I'm just going to go grab some cereal. But that's obviously not until, you know, years after they've left the centers. But that's what you're helping to develop. Okay. So now let's really get down to what this webinar is supposed to be about. And that is challenging behavior in our centers. But we're also going to keep talking about self-regulation and why it is so important to develop in our infants and toddlers. So self-regulation and temperament, so the challenging behavior or not so challenging behavior, often go very, very much hand in hand. When babies have difficulty regulating their emotions, their families and caregivers may see their behavior as super challenging. So let's say you have an infant or a toddler that cries every single day from the hours of 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. until they're fed. Does this necessarily mean that they're bad kids or that they're challenging kids? No. It's more along the lines of, is it that I, as a caregiver, need to learn to work with this child and with this child's temperament? Is the behavior really that challenging, or do I need to help this child learn to self-regulate their skills? That's how we should start seeing any sort of challenging behavior in our centers. We need to come from a strength-based perspective. We need to look at, well, this child's really not bad. They're just crying for 2.5 hours straight. How can I help them stop doing that or regulate that? So maybe they're only crying for an hour for the next week, and then maybe the week after that they're only crying for 30 minutes, and then maybe the week after that they're only crying for 20, right? So we need, as caregivers, we need to respond to this challenging behavior as if it's something that we can work with and something that we can change. So let's pose an example, okay? Caregiver Vivian has just finished feeding, changing, and rocking 7-month-old Darnell. He is almost asleep, Vivian lays him in his crib, covers him, and quietly walks away. Within 10 minutes, Darnell is crying. This scenario plays out every time until Darnell is laid down for a nap. Every time that Darnell is laid down for a nap. So let's look at some of the responses, and then I'm going to have you guys guess. So would you, A, let Darnell cry it out every day that he continues to react this way during nap time? B, hold Darnell through his entire nap time every day until she thinks he will not continue this behavior during nap time? C, change up Darnell's nap time every day that she cares for him, so he has a different nap time every single day? D, Vivian can continue to provide consistent nap times and can try standing nearby and pat his back if he continues to cry. So let's take a second. You can even pause the webinar if you want to figure out your answer. Okay, once again, whatever you write down, I can't see, hear, guess. I will never know. I don't have ESP. So let's just take a guess. So if you answer D, then you're definitely correct. In this case, when Vivian keeps the mind goal of helping Darnell to learn to put himself to sleep, her approach of standing nearby or patting his back really facilitates Darnell to move towards self-regulation. So eventually, he'll be able to put himself to sleep and he won't cry for that long, or he won't cry every time during nap time that he's laid down. As caregivers, we can definitely address the challenges some babies or toddlers may exhibit by providing that external support to help them develop their own self-regulation. Let's keep moving on for some strategies on how to help very young children shift from not so self-regulating to self-regulating. Okay, so in our centers, we can use some photographs, pictures, and posters that portray people in various emotional states. We actually are going to talk about this in a little while, and I'm going to show you guys something really cool that's called the Wheel of Feelings, and I'll even give you some advice on how to set it up and how to make it into an art project. Okay? So next, we can observe and share aloud how children's actions influence others in the rooms. So for example, right, let's say your toddler, is throwing Play-Doh across the room, right? Now, the other toddlers in the area are getting very upset and are getting very agitated as well, and one is even starting to cry. You may want to go over to that toddler that is throwing the Play-Doh and basically say, listen, I understand that you want to throw Play-Doh right now, but you are really upsetting your friends in the classroom, and we really don't want to upset your other friends, do you? No. So that's how you can help them self-regulate and help them to see what's going on around them. So next, we can introduce children to more complicated and varied feeling words, including positive and neutral terms. So we don't always want to say, you're angry, you're sad, you're crying, you're tired. We want to make sure that we include some positive terms in there as well. You're really happy today, or you're really smiley today, or you're really positive today. Things like that. You're doing a really great job today. Words like that, so that not only point out the negative, but they also include the positive. Okay, so we really want to be present and offer calm words of support during a toddler tantrum. I really think this one is very, very, very important. So it's especially important to consider when dealing with temper tantrums. I don't even really like to call them temper tantrums. I think that it's an unfair word that we use to judge what's going on, but we may not necessarily, as we've learned, know what's going on because our infants and toddlers can't necessarily vocalize, right, what's happening. So our choice of words when they're throwing these tantrums as caregivers is crucial to how a toddler will feel about whatever has occurred to cause this tantrum. And I always use that word tantrum very lightly. So stop crying, or, you caused your own crying, or this is your fault and that's why you're crying. We need to be positive, and we really, really need to remain calm because we don't always necessarily know why the child is throwing the tantrum. So for example, a toddler in your center may be very angry and having a hard time vocalizing his or her anger, which is when they start to cry or when they start to throw their tantrum. You could go about this by saying, I can see that you're very mad and very angry. I'll stay right here so that you don't hurt yourself or you don't hurt your friends, and when you're ready for a hug, I'll be right here waiting for it. That's a way to approach a child who's throwing a tantrum where you don't necessarily know what's going on. There wasn't anything observable. They weren't fighting with another child. They weren't acting out with another child. Nothing was taken away from them. So this is a technique, staying calm, using words of support, and saying, I'll be right here waiting for a hug can really make a difference. Okay, so moving on. Label your own emotional state and provide an action statement. I also really think that this is important because we all have bad days, right? We're humans. We could just have had a bad morning. We missed our ride. We missed our train. You know, we didn't get our coffee. I really believe that taking a deep breath and catching yourself from saying something potentially harmful to a child in your center can be really imperative to how this child functions socially and emotionally throughout the rest of their time in the center. So let's say you're just having a really bad day and there's just nothing you can do to calm yourself, right? There's nothing that is going to make you feel better. You're just having a bad day. And your child is screaming at the top of his or her lungs and you have no idea what to do or what is going on. You weren't around when they started to cry, yada, yada, yada. You weren't there when the mother or the father dropped them off in the center. You have no idea why they're having a bad day. They're just screaming at the top of their lungs and nothing is helping. I'm getting frustrated thinking about it. What you can do is really take a deep breath, count to 5, take another deep breath, walk over to the child, and make sure that you offer those words of support and in a calm manner. It's really important to note your mood when you're working with children or when you're working with teenagers, I guess, in general. I know, let's say, if you're working with a teenager and that teenager comes in and gives you such a big attitude because there were stains all over their baby's shirt the day before, and you don't know why. The teenager is mad because now they have to do an extra load of laundry, right, to get these stains out, and they snap at you. I think it's really important as a role model and as their baby's caregiver to just take a step back. Even though you're in a bad mood and you're having a bad day, you just take a breath and you'll be like, okay, we'll make sure it won't happen again. And that way you're also modeling how to react to that teenager as well. That teenager may have expected you to snap back at them, you know, but I think if you stay calm and you remember how you went into the center that day and how we're not taking out our anger and our frustrations on our children or on our teenagers, we may feel a little bit better. I know learning to drive is probably, I always use this analogy, but learning to drive, it's an extremely frustrating experience, I'm sure, for a parent of a child. I'm sure it's also very terrifying at the same time. Just remember to always take a deep breath. If that parent should always remember to take a deep breath when they're getting into the car with their child. Remember that they're learning, they're developing, they're growing up. Maybe they've never sat behind the wheel of a car before, and always buckle your seatbelt. So that's kind of where I'm going with this. But we can also choose books, music, and finger plays with a rich vocabulary of feeling words. I always say the more decoration in your centers, the better. I definitely think having emotions and pictures of emotions up on the toddler side is a really, really good idea, but we're going to get into that in a little bit. Okay, so some tips of the trade for toddler tantrums. This is not necessarily used with your younger kids. This is used with your toddlers. Or actually it could be used with your infants as well. They just, may not have the same reactions as toddlers. So anyway, let's think about the day-to-day activities in your center. let's say one of your toddlers, who we're going to call Jamie, is playing in the arts and crafts area of your center, right? Jamie is being supervised making different shapes out of different colored Play-Doh by one of your novice caregivers in the center. Jamie really loves the pink Play-Doh, but so does your other toddler, Billy. Your caregiver looks away for 1 second, and Billy proceeds to grab the pink Play-Doh out of Jamie's hand. Jamie begins to cry and have a tantrum and ends up throwing her blue Play-Doh at Billy. Your caregiver has no idea how to soothe Jamie or even begin to understand what just happened. So, as caregivers, what do? We remain really calm. As we've learned, tantrums are a natural response to frustration and anger for our toddlers, right? So what did we talk about before? We're going to take a really deep breath. We're not going to raise our voice. We're not going to say anything to the other caregiver. We're going to look at the entire situation before we react, even if we've had a bad day, which leads me into the don't show your anger part, right? You can't shame your toddler out of throwing the tantrum. You can't yell at Jamie or Billy. Maybe what you should do is separate the toddlers into a comfortable space of their own where they're able to flush out their tantrum, right? So we take the Play-Doh away and we just basically separate them into different corners of the room or different areas of the room, and one caregiver goes to one and one caregiver goes to the other, right? And what are we going to do? We're going to talk to them again. We're going to say, I see that you're frustrated. I see that you're sad. I'm going to sit here, and when you're ready for a hug, I'll be right here. Okay, so next, after we do that, after we make that prompt, after we tell them I'll be right here when you're ready, we're not going to talk. Your toddlers are in no frame of mind to listen to logic or reason. So while they're having this tantrum, they don't want to hear you say, you shouldn't have thrown your Play-Doh, or to Billy, you shouldn't have taken Jamie's Play-Doh out of her hand. And then to Jamie, you should not have thrown your Play-Doh at Billy. They don't want to hear your logic. They don't want to hear your reasons. They're not adults yet, right? They're not fully developed mentally, socially, emotionally, and so on and so forth. They don't want to hear you talk. They just want to hear you say, I'm here for a hug when you're ready, and that's the end of it. Okay? So we definitely don't want to punish. We don't want to say, go sit in timeout. We don't want to vocalize those words. Even though we're separating our toddlers and maybe putting them on separate sides of the room, we're not labeling it timeout, or we're not saying you're in trouble. We're just letting them flush out their anger. If you do punish and you do raise your voice, you are adding fuel to the fire. You're going to make this tantrum last longer, and I don't think anybody wants that happening in their centers, right? Okay, so next, even though we're not going to punish, we're not going to give in. We're not going to let the toddler do or whatever caused or whomever caused the tantrum to get away with it, right? Giving in only reinforces the behavior and makes it more likely that it'll happen again, okay? But at the same time, we have to wait until their tantrum is over to really talk with them about what just happened between the two toddlers, okay? So lastly, I think I've said this about 600 times, let the tantrum run its course. Toddlers need to run out of steam on their own, and they always will. I don't think it's plausible or possible for a toddler to scream for more than an hour without getting exhausted. So definitely let the tantrum run its course. So let's say Jamie calms down before Billy. The novice caregiver can go sit with Billy while you go talk to Jamie, and you remain calm and you don't show your anger, and you definitely don't say you're punished, you're going to sit in timeout after they have just finished exhausting themselves in this tantrum, because other than that, they're probably going to start crying again, right? If you start to punish them immediately, they're probably going to start crying again after they just finished their initial tantrum. Okay, so let's learn some techniques. Now, your turtle technique is 100% used with your older toddlers because they can kind of understand you a little bit more. I would even say that this is used for preschoolers as well. I think it's a great technique. So the turtle technique basically teaches the child the steps of how to control feelings and how to calm down. So 1, recognize, you can sit with your child and say, recognize your feelings. So how do you feel today? How do you feel today? Or how did that make you feel? Or what is causing you to cry? Or what is causing you to put your head down? Help them to recognize their feelings. Help them to understand what they are feeling. Put a word to what they're feeling. It will help them. So then step 2, we're going to think. We're going to stop. We're going to take one giant deep breath. And then step 3, we're going to go inside our shells and take 3 deep breaths. So we're going to go 3 times, right? Then the child can come out when they're calm, and let's talk about a solution, and let's think about a solution, and let's solve the problem in front of us, right? So I think that this works really, really well for our older children, our older toddlers, and even our preschoolers. So we really, with this technique, with the turtle technique, we need to practice our steps frequently. We need to prepare for and help the child handle possible disappointment or change. So let's say that they finally come out of their shell, right? And they're calm and they're ready to talk to you, but the situation, nothing is going to change. Or they're not going to get their truck back. Or mom is not going to pick them up from the center. We need to help vocalize that for them and be like, I understand you're really upset and you're having a really bad day, but mommy can't come pick you up. We're going to hang out for the rest of the day, and we're going to work quietly together for the rest of the day, helping them prepare and helping them transition from that panic tantrum mode to the more calm, let's continue with the rest of our day mode is really, really important. And then I also think it's very important that once the child definitely comes out of their shell or their turtle shell, it's really important to recognize and comment when the child stays calm. So it's important to recognize them not only for their bad behavior or their tantrum, but for their good behavior as well. So they listened to you. They took that deep breath. They definitely listened to you. Okay, so let's keep going. On to our next technique. This is the wheel of feelings. Helping children learn to recognize and cope with overwhelming emotions is an ongoing process, like we've been talking about the entire time, that will become even more important once your toddlers go up to preschool and elementary school, right? Teaching your toddlers how their bodies and emotions respond to their big feelings, especially their tantrums, is extremely important to help your toddlers vocalize how they are feeling. So what I think is a great way is to keep a wheel of feelings handy for those special moments when they're too upset to vocalize their frustrations, okay? So we can actually make these in our centers. So if we have 2 paper plates, you know, maybe we can make this a coloring project. So we'll draw a line so it looks like a pizza pie, right? We poke a hole in the middle and we put one of those spinner things. You know, we've all seen those spinner things on, you know, Monopoly game boards, on the Game of Life game boards. We've all seen them. They sell them at Michael's. We can get them there. And maybe we draw out a couple of circles, right, with a couple of different expressions, and we let our toddlers color them in. So it can become an arts and crafts activity, or it can become an activity during the day. And I think it's important to have one in English and one in Spanish as well in your centers. And attached to the email where I sent the webinar, I have attached 2, it's not a wheel, but it's a chart of feelings. And one is in English and one is in Spanish. So you can definitely post those in your centers or use those, but I actually think it would be a really great idea if you made this with your toddlers, or you made this with your other caregivers and let your toddlers color it in during arts and crafts time. Okay, so also let's not forget that we need to do that quite often. We need to use that wheel of feelings often. Every time we need to put a word to what the child is feeling, and we need to show them what that word means by the face on the chart. Okay? We also need to prepare our child for handling the fact that emotion may not change. Just because they pointed to it on the chart, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to feel any different, right? And then we need to recognize and comment when the child stays calm, or when they've acknowledged that, yes, I'm angry, maybe I should move my wheel to being happy. Yes, we need to acknowledge that. Okay, so before we end our time here today, I know we're all exhausted from listening to me talk. Let's take out that same blank sheet of paper, or we can take out a new blank sheet of paper, and let's make a pledge to use your new knowledge in your centers about social emotional development, self-regulation, a child's temperament, if you're going to use one of the techniques, if you're going to use one of the tips. Let's make a pledge. Let's fold up that piece of paper and keep it with us at all times. You know, let's say if I worked in a child care center, I know I would need to make a pledge to just keep calm at all times, right? Keep calm, take a breath, assess the situation, and then solve the situation. That would be my pledge. So what's your pledge? And obviously I can't see, hear, read, write anything that's going on the other side of the screen, so you can keep your pledges to yourself or you can share them. Okay, so before we close, I'm going to do a little bit of a closing activity. So let's take out our image of our brain. I'm going to flash some words on the screen that you may say during your daily time spent at your centers or at home with your own children. Okay? So you may say, "Great job today. I love how you always try your hardest. I'm listening. Thank you for cleaning up after yourself. Even if you make a mistake, you should keep going. I cannot wait to hear about your day. You're very good at that. You make me proud." Now that was always a very important sentence for me to hear growing up. So which one of these was always very important for you to say, or was very important for you to hear growing up? What you did was awesome. Okay, so now I'm going to flash some other statements that you may use out of frustration, exhaustion, or momentary anger at your centers or at home even with your own children or your own families, right? So you may say these out of frustration. "You're acting like a baby. What are you, stupid? If you weren't so clumsy, your classmate wouldn't have gotten hurt. You are so bad. You're making me angry. You constantly disappoint me. Can't you do anything right? Ugh, just stop crying, you're annoying me." So sometimes if we're having our bad day and we're saying these things, you know, we don't always mean them, but we are saying them and the child is listening, or the toddler is listening, or the teenager is listening. So take that picture of our brain and let's crumple it up. Crumple it up into a ball, a squishy little ball, right? Okay, till it's all smushed. All right, it's all crumpled. Let's try and smooth it out, okay? Keep trying. Make sure it's flat. We want it all flat so that it was just like the way it was before you crumpled it up into a ball. Is it flat yet? Keep going. Did you get it flat? Does it look the same? Does it look the same as it did before? No, right? It's still crumply. There's still creases and it's still all wrecked and ruined looking, right? So I know growing up we probably all heard the term, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me." And I think that is one of the most detrimental statements to ever make to a child, because words hurt. Words hurt at any age. But that does not mean that they need to have a lasting impact. But studies have shown that saying words like, "You're acting like a baby," or "What are you, stupid?" or "You're so bad," "Can't you do anything right?" "You constantly disappoint me." Saying things like that have long-term negative and potentially harmful effects on a child's brain development, on their social emotional development, on their ability to self-regulate, right? So it's almost a form of emotional abuse when we're saying these words, even if we don't mean them. Our brains are never quite the same after hearing these words. So what we say to our infants and toddlers now has a major impact on them in the future. It's important to use strength-based wording when we speak to our children in our centers. Strength-based. Always find the strength. I think it's so important when working with an infant, a toddler, a teenager, even a young adult. I just think it's so imperative that we draw from their strengths and we solve the situation through their strengths. We don't look at the negative. Because like I said, words like the words that are in red on the screen have a long-lasting impact on the child that you're working with, or the toddler you're working with, or the teenager or the young adult. A long, long impact, and it can really be detrimental. So I think it's really important, really, really important that we use some of the tips and the tools that we talked about today. Okay? So this is my Works Cited. This is where all of this fabulous information came from. Feel free to go to any of these websites or look up any of these articles. They're awesome. I definitely think that they're worth reading through. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and your devotion to your toddlers and your infants and your centers. And I look forward to receiving so many worksheets back and your evaluations, because I would really love to hear your feedback and your opinions about this webinar. So everyone have a great day, and I hope you enjoyed the webinar, Understanding and Communicating with Angry Children, and I look forward to hearing your responses. Thanks.